Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jaya mudiraye nashta prayasvabhadrishu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavatyuttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naistiki yam pravrajantam anupetam apeta krityam dvaipayano virahakatara juhava putreti tanmayatayo taravo binedus tam sarvabhuta hridayam munimanatosmi. So we're reading Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 2, Ajamila delivered by the Vishnu Dutas, text 47 to 49. Yaha etam paramam guhyam itihasam aghapaham shrinuyat shraddhaya yuktaha yaha cha bhaktya anukirtayet na vai saha narakam yati nekshitaha yama kinkaraihi. Sorry, anyway. Yaitam paramam guhyam Yaitam paramam guhyam itihasam aghapaham itihasam aghapaham Srinuyat shraddhaya yukto yascha bhaktyanu kirtaye Yaitam paramam guhyam itihasam aghapaham Srinuyat shraddhaya yukto yascha bhaktiyanu kirtaye
Yaitam paramam guhyam itihasam aghapaham Shinuyat shraddhaya yukto yascha bhaktiyanu kirtayet
Yaitam paramam guhyam itihasam aghapaham Shinuyat shraddhaya yukto yascha bhaktiyanu kirtayet Yaitam paramam guhyam itihasam aghapaham Shinuyat shraddhaya yukto yascha bhaktiyanu kirtayet
Ladies. Yaitam paramam guhyam itihasam aghapaham yukto yaha anyone who etam this paramam very guhyam confidential itihasam historical narration agha apaham which frees one from all reactions of sins Shrinuyat, hears. Shradaya, with faith. Yuktaha, endowed. Yaha, one who. Cha, also. Bhaktya, with great devotion. Anukirtayet, repeats. Na, not. Why, indeed. Saha, such a person. Narakam, to hell. Yati, goes. Na, not. Ikshitaha, is observed. Yamakinkaraihi, by the order carriers of Yamaraja. Yadi api, although. Amangalaha, inauspicious. Martyaha, a living entity with a material body. Vishnuloke, in the spiritual world. Mahiyate, is welcomed and respectfully received. So I will chant the second verse. 48. Navai sa narakam yati nekshito yamakin karaihi yadi apyamangalo martyo vishnuloki mahiyate. Translation. Because this very confidential historical narration has the potency to vanquish all sinful reactions, one who hears or describes it with faith and devotion is no longer doomed to hellish life, regardless to his having a material body and regardless of how sinful he may have been. Indeed, the Yamadutas who carry out the orders of Yamaraja do not approach him even to see him. After giving up his body, he returns home back to Godhead, where he is very respectfully received and worshipped. Text number 49. Mriyamano harer nama grinan putro pacharitam ajamilo pyagat dhama kim uta shradhaya grinan. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. While suffering at the time of death, Ajamila chanted the holy name of the Lord, and although the chanting was directed toward his son, he nevertheless returned home back to Godhead. Therefore, if one faithfully and inoffensively chants the holy name of the Lord, where is the doubt that he will return to Godhead? Purport. At the time of death, one is certainly bewildered because his bodily functions are in disorder. At that time, even one who throughout his life has practiced chanting of the holy name of the Lord may not be able to chant the Hare Krishna mantra distinctly. Nevertheless, such a person receives all the benefits of chanting the holy name. While the body is fit, therefore, why should we not chant the holy name of the Lord loudly and distinctly? If one does so, it is quite possible that even at the time of death, he will be properly able to chant the holy name of the Lord with love and faith. In conclusion, one who chants the holy name of the Lord constantly is guaranteed to return home back to Godhead without a doubt. There is also additional supplementary note to this chapter. It's quite long. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti Thakur's commentary to text 9 and 10 of this chapter form a dialogue concerning how one can become free from all sinful reactions simply by chanting the holy name of the Lord. Someone may say, it may be accepted that by chanting the holy name of the Lord, one becomes freed from all the reactions of sinful life. However, if one can commit sinful acts in full consciousness, not only once but many, many times, he is unable to free himself from the reactions of such sins, even after atoning for them for 12 years or more. How is it possible then that simply by once chanting the holy name of the Lord, one immediately becomes freed from reactions of such sins? Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur replies by quoting verse 9 and 10 of this chapter. The chanting of the holy name of Lord Vishnu is the best process of atonement for a thief of gold or other valuables, for a drunkard, for one who betrays a friend or relative, for one who kills a brahmana, or for one who indulges in sex with the wife of his guru or another superior. It is also the best method of atonement for one who murders women, the king or his father, or one who slaughters cows, or for all other sinful men. Simply by chanting the holy name of Lord Vishnu, such sinful persons may attract the attention of the Supreme Lord, who therefore considers, because this man has chanted my name, my duty is to give him protection. One may atone for sinful life and vanquish all sinful reactions by chanting the holy name, although this is not called atonement. Ordinary atonement may temporarily protect a sinful person, but it does not completely cleanse the heart of deep-rooted desire to commit sinful acts. Therefore, atonement is not as powerful as the chanting of the holy name of the Lord. In the Shastras, it is said that if a person only once chants the holy name and completely surrenders unto the lotus feet of the Lord immediately considers him his ward and is always inclined to give him protection. This is confirmed by Sridhara Swami. Thus, when Ajamila was in great danger of being carried off by the order carriers of Yamaraja, the Lord immediately sent his personal order carriers to protect him. And because Ajamila was freed from all sinful reactions, the Vishnudutas spoke on his behalf. Ajamila had named his son Narayana, and because he loved the boy very much, he would call him again and again. Although he was calling for his son, the name itself was powerful because the name Narayana is not different from the Supreme Lord Narayana. When Ajamila named his son Narayana, all the reactions of his sinful life were neutralized. And as he continued calling his son, and thus chanting the holy name of Narayana thousands of times, he was actually unconsciously advancing in Krishna consciousness. A very nice phrase, unconsciously advancing in Krishna consciousness. One may argue, since he was constantly chanting the name of Narayana, how was it possible for him to be associating with a prostitute and thinking of wine? And therefore, one may say that his ultimate chanting of Narayana was the cause of his being freed. However, his chanting would then have been a nama parada, namno balat yasya hi papa buddhi. One who continues to act sinfully and tries to neutralize his sins by chanting the holy name of the Lord is a nama paradhi, an offender of the holy name. In response, It may be said that Ajamila's chanting was inoffensive because he did not chant the name of Narayana with the purpose of counteracting his sins. He did not know that he was addicted to sinful actions, nor did he know that his chanting of the name of Narayana was neutralizing them. Thus, he did not commit a nama parada, and his repeated chanting of the name of Narayana while chanting his sons, calling his son, may be called pure chanting. Because of this pure chanting, Ajamila unconsciously accumulated the results of bhakti. Indeed, even his first utterance of the holy name was sufficient to nullify all the sinful reactions of his life. To cite a logical example, a fig tree does not immediately yield fruits, but in time the fruits are available. Similarly, Ajamila's devotional service grew little by little, and therefore, although he committed very sinful acts, the reaction did not affect him. In the Shastra it is said that if one chants the holy name of the Lord even once, the reactions of past, present, or future sinful life do not affect him. To give another example, if one extracts the poison fangs of a serpent, this saves the serpent's future victims from poisonous effect, even if the serpent bites repeatedly. Similarly, if a devotee chants the holy name even once inoffensively, this protects him eternally. He need only wait for the result of the chanting to mature in due course of time. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 6th canto, 2nd chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Ajamila delivered by the Vishnu Dutas. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatyadesh Tarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Yantah Pravishya Mama Vachimamam Prasuptam Sanjeevayata Kila Shakti Darakshvadam Manyam Shahasta Charana Shravanatma Gadi Pranannamo Bhagavate Purushaya Tubhim Svasyasta Vishwasya Kala Prasidatam Dayantu Bhutani Shivam Mithodya Manascha Badram Bhajata Tadokshaje Aveshyatam Nahamati Abhyahayituki. So that's the conclusion of one of the most prominent and important stories of the whole Srimad Bhagavatam, Ajamila Katha. The 6th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, according to Krama understanding of the structure of Srimad Bhagavatam, is related to Poshanam, topic of Mahapurana. Poshanam means nourishment. Mahapurana is described or is presenting actually the most important topic, which is Ashraya, the Lord, who is the ultimate shelter of all living entities, is describing this ultimate shelter through different topics, describing different topics, giving us impetus to surrender to this ultimate shelter, Ashraya. And one of the topics, Atra Sarga Visargascha, Stanam Poshanam Utaya, one of the 10 topics, the 4th topic to be exact, is Poshanam, which is nourishment. How all the living entities ultimately are being nourished by the Supreme Lord even now. Even at this present time, we sustain our life because of the mercy of the Lord. And Srila Shukadev Goswami, while glossing this Poshanam topic, he says, Toshanam tadanugraha. It basically means that Poshanam, what is the living force which sustains our life is the mercy of the Lord, tadanugraha. So the 6th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam is exactly describing how the mercy of the Lord is coming to the living entities of this world. And the two most prominent stories of the 6th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the Ajamila story and Vritrasura story, is the illustration of this fact. It's actually the description of the mechanism, how the nourishment comes to our life, how we can sustain our life by the mercy of the Lord. And the two stories which are most prominent in the 6th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, one is story of Ajamila, where the nourishment is coming to the living entities of this world through the means of the holy name. That's the real mercy of the Lord. The availability of the contact with the Lord through His holy name, availability of this most powerful means of purifying the heart is the mercy of the Lord. Without this availability, without this facility, without the Lord being readily available for us in the form of the holy name, the whole world would go to hell long ago. Because by nature we are prone to sinful activities. It's a very natural inclination of conditioned living entity. It's just so natural that we don't even feel that it's sinful. Like Prabhupada explains this in the purport, that Ajamila was doing all kinds of sinful activities, but he didn't even realize that it's sinful, because it's natural. When it's natural, how is it sinful? It's just some manifestation, some expression of my freedom, of my nature. Exactly this natural tendency, which is in the ultimate consideration, if we really very carefully consider it, it's unnatural. Sinful activities are unnatural. Meat eating is unnatural. Intoxication is unnatural. But because of this acquired nature, because of the conditioned nature which we acquired in a long run of associating with this material energy, it became very natural, very spontaneous. You don't have to teach Russian people to drink vodka, because it's so natural. It's their svabhav. it's huh?
Like drinking water.
Yeah. It's in the blood. It's in the genes, so to speak. Because if you practice something for a long time, it becomes your nature. And since we all practice this for a long time, it became our nature, and we don't really consider it unnatural. From the point of view of spirit soul, it's totally unnatural. It's completely obnoxious, and it's disgusting. But when you practice for a little while devotional service, it becomes like this. So the point is that if this facility was not there, facility of purifying association with the holy name in different traditions, in different spiritual traditions, the holy names are there. And as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Nam Nama Kari Bahuda Nija Sarva Shakti, there are so many names, and all the names are carriers of Krishna's Shakti. Actually, it is said by Srila Jiva Goswami, and that, you know, like if you take this sugar syrup, which is very condensed, and if you want to, he says that the sugar syrup of the bliss, eternal spiritual bliss, was poured into two molds. One mold was two-handed form of Lord Krishna, and another mold was his holy name. So these two molds are there, but the same content is there. Therefore we say, Binatvam Nama Namino. The Nama and Nami are not different from each other. The name is the Lord, and the Lord is the name. There is no difference between Shabda Brahman and Para Brahman. There is two twin manifestations. So, but the difference is that it's very difficult to obtain the association of Param Brahman, Supreme Lord in his full form. But it's very easy to obtain association of the Supreme Lord in his full form, in the form of sound. And that's actually why this story is there in the very beginning of the sixth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, so that we know how to nourish our spiritual inclination, because it's also there. Despite the fact that the material tendencies, sinful tendencies are very strong, still being spirit soul in the ultimate issue, in the ultimate consideration, we are also inclined to something spiritual. So how to nourish this spiritual nature, the spiritual tendency which is there? For that, this story is there in Srimad Bhagavatam. That's the way. That's the only way. I mean, there are some other ways to do it. There is karma yoga, and there is jnana yoga, and there are so many different forms of spiritual practices. But the message of Srimad Bhagavatam is very clear. Other things do not work, especially in Kali Yuga. Actually, they don't work in any other yuga as well, but at least there is some hope that some sort of influence will be there, because people are more pure. But in Kali Yuga, Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Namaiva Kevalam, Kalu Nastyeva, Nastyeva, Nastyeva Gatiranyatha. It's difficult to imagine more emphatic statement than this particular statement from Brihanaradiya Purana. Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Namaiva Kevalam. You know, 3 times Hare Nama, and then Hare Nama Eva, and then Kevalam. In case you didn't understand yet what you're supposed to do, just chant the holy name, only the holy name, and nothing else should be done. So that's the more or less the context why this story is there. But the details of this story, the very plot of this story is actually very important, and Srila Prabhupada indicates or explains the purport of this story in this additional supplementary notes to this chapter. And the idea is that why holy name is so powerful, because it has Vastu Shakti. Vastu Shakti, every Vastu, Vastu means the substance, has Vastu Shakti, very specific Shakti, which is inherent in this Vastu. So the Vastu Shakti, the definition of Vastu Shakti is that Vastu Shakti, Vastu Shaktir nahi buddhi apekshate. Vastu Shakti, to act upon something, The Vastu Shakti is not dependent on the buddhi, on the consciousness of a person who is associating with this particular substance. It doesn't matter what is your consciousness, whether you are offensive or not, whether you're sinful. Well, yeah, still Vastu Shakti will act upon you. The simple example is the Vastu Shakti of the fire is to burn. And it doesn't matter whether you believe in Vastu Shakti of the fire or you don't believe. You may say, I don't believe that fire will burn, and you put your hand and lo and behold, it still burns. Because that's the nature of Vastu Shakti. Vastu Shakti does not depend on your buddhi, on your intelligence. Does not depend on your consciousness. It acts in every condition while you are associating with them. And this whole story, this initial part of the story, is illustrating this. In fact, Shukadev Goswami, while describing this story, he even says that whether you believe or not in the power of the medicine, the powerful medicine will act upon you. That's the illustration, another illustration of Vastu Shakti. You know, you may not believe in some very powerful drug, in some allopathic medicine. You take it and, you know, you may not believe in it, but it still will change your consciousness, or, you know, change the chemical composition of your body. So that's one part, very important, that Vastu Shakti of the holy name is there, and the holy name will act whether you believe it on it or not. It will act. The Srila Jiva Goswami, was Srila Jiva? No, Sanatana Goswami. He gives another example from Varaha Purana. There are so many stories in different Puranas which illustrate this point, that you don't have to believe in the holy name, you still will be subject of its mercy. And that's how people get the mercy of Krishna in the form of the holy name. So the funny story which is there in Varaha Purana is that once a Brahmana was chanting the holy name while standing in Ganges, in the river Ganga. And he was chanting the holy name, being quiet. And at that time, from the jungles, the tiger came, and he thought it's a very nice piece of meat, chanting the holy name. So he was ready to jump and to commit sinful, well, for tiger it's not so sinful to kill Brahmana. Tiger is just a, normal food. But at that very moment, while he was ready to jump on the Brahmana, the hunter from the other side, with his arrow, he killed this tiger. And because at the moment of death, the tiger was hearing the sound of the holy name emanating from the lips of a Brahmana who he didn't have time to eat yet. Of course, maybe eating would also be purifying for him because it's such a meat free from sinful reactions. But anyway, because he heard this dim reflection of the holy name touch his ears, he immediately was liberated. The tiger became, Manjari. I don't know if that was the case. But anyway, he went to Vaikuntha, to the spiritual world. So this story, and many other stories, innumerable other stories in Puranas, they illustrate this point that there is Vastu Shakti. But in case of Ajamila, why this story didn't end, this is the specialty of Srimad Bhagavatam. In other Puranas, the story ends there. In other Puranas, the whole story is that, you want liberation, here is the way to get liberated. Just chant the holy name even once, no problem. So, just try to do it wholeheartedly, you're saved. But this is not the case of Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad Bhagavatam is not satisfied with liberation. The very point of Srimad Bhagavatam is not to provide liberation from the sinful activities, but to give the love of God. And therefore, the story of Ajamila didn't end when Vishnudutas and Yamadutas quarreled a little bit with each other, and ultimately Vishnudutas free Ajamil, and Ajamil came back to his body. So, in case of tiger or, the crow or whatever, or little rat who lit the, the deepa for the Lord, they were immediately liberated. But Ajamil, while having this near-death experience, very vivid near-death experience, and actually it is said in Srimad Bhagavatam that Ajamil wanted to say something, but he couldn't because he was about to die. So he was returned to body, and Srila Prabhupada and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, they explained that why he was returned to body. Actually, that was the proper moment of his death, which was according to the sinful activities he created. But because what happened with him, so we are born with a certain allotted lifespan. And when the time of our death comes, nothing can actually stop the death from coming to us and taking us from this body. When we commit sinful activities, we shorten our lifespan. The allotted lifespan is shortened by sinful acts which we commit. So it's not that, this lifespan which we are supposed to live here cannot be shortened. It can be shortened. It is effectively shortened by sinful activities. So Ajamil committed sinful activities. So his allotted lifespan was shortened. And at that time, Yamadutas, who are very, nicely calculating his lifespan, came and said, this is the time for you to leave the body. But then Vishnudutas came and said, no, wait a second. Actually, his life is not shortened by his sinful activities because he doesn't have any sinful activities. So he has to live the full life with, according to his karma, how he is born. And therefore, some extra period of time was given to him, and therefore he had this near-death experience. It's actually a very interesting explanation of this phenomenon, why this near-death experience take place, because of some mistakes in calculation of the Yamadutas, so because they miscalculated this, they didn't take into consideration this sort of stuff. But why this addendum to the happy end is there, why this additional happy end is added to this story, is that because even though the holy name has the inherent power to free us from the sinful activities, still, if we want to obtain love of God, it's not enough. It's not enough because to obtain love of God or to experience the full effect of bhakti, we need to completely absorb ourselves in bhakti. This occasional bhakti, unintentional bhakti, the bhakti without, as Prabhupada says, unconscious bhakti will not help us to obtain love of God. Unconscious bhakti is fine when we are talking about liberation. Bhakti is so powerful that it can give us liberation without, if we unconsciously perform Krishna consciousness, as Prabhupada beautifully and very ironically, humorously says this, it's enough for us to obtain liberation. But unconscious performance of Krishna consciousness is not enough to give us love of Godhead. Actually, Srila Jiva Goswami makes a very interesting point at this, in this regard. He says that for that you need Shraddha. If you want to obtain the full power, if you want really to take advantage of the full power of bhakti process, you need Shraddha, because Shraddha is the instrument by which you can concentrate your full consciousness on the process of bhakti. This is what you need. And what Srila Jiva Goswami makes a very interesting point, very important point. He says, if you perform bhakti without Shraddha, and so many people, they don't have really deeply rooted Shraddha, just in case, in case it works, let's do it. They don't know the purport of the scriptures, they don't study scriptures deeply, they don't have this inclination, they don't have faith. Because they don't have faith, Srila Jiva Goswami says, they just practice bhakti for a short time and they give it up. And that's what we see in case of devotees. Sometimes devotees come, but they don't work hard enough to develop Shraddha, Shastriya Shraddha, scriptural faith, not just sentimental faith, not just conventional faith, Lokika Shraddha, because they don't have, and Srila Prabhupada himself even says in Bhagavad Gita, in this purport to the verse 9.3, Ashradadhana Purusho, Dharmasya Sya Parantapa. He says that those people who don't have Shraddha, they practice, the bhakti will die very soon. The eternal bhakti will die in your heart very soon. Because Shraddha is the nourishment for bhakti. It's the initial, it's initial condition by which bhakti can flourish within our heart. And Shraddha, again, why it is necessary? Because having Shraddha, we will take bhakti seriously. Otherwise, it will be just, some recreation point. We will dance a little bit and then eat some prasadam and then, and then go away and continue Ajamila life in the material world. So, and therefore, this story is described in this way, and actually the purport of these verses which describe the life of Ajamil after this near-death experience, explaining what Shraddha means. Because again, we hear Shraddha, 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 and we hear faith, everyone is talking about faith. But how does it manifest? And the repentance of Ajamil, his thinking process, which Srila Shukadev Goswami describes so beautifully and vividly in the verses of this chapter, is explanation what it means to have Shraddha. The word Shraddha, the faith, is completely meaningless if it doesn't invoke the same mentality which is depicted in this chapter. If it doesn't invoke in you the sincere regret of the sinful activities which you committed, if it doesn't really give you very strong hope that here is the means by which I can be completely purified and obtain some higher realm. Shraddha, it's quite complex emotional state. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in his Amnaya Sutra, he gives a definition of Shraddha. He says, Shraddha, Anya Upaya Varjam, Chitta Vritti Visheshaha. That's the first part of his definition. Shraddha, the phase in the process of bhakti, is Chitta Vritti Visheshaha, is a special state of your consciousness, is a special state of your heart. It definitely, this definition definitely rings the, creates the connotation with the definition of yoga. In Patanjali Yoga Sutras, it is that Chitta Vritti, yoga's Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga is the complete elimination of Chitta Vritti, the complete elimination of your mental activity. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, no, Bhakti Yoga does not imply and does not even require the Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Bhakti Yoga, for its performance, require Chitta Vritti Vishesha, very special sort of your Chitta Vritti, very special sort of your consciousness, of your heart, condition of your heart. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur then explains in the next sutra, he explains what is this special inclination or special condition of your consciousness which can be Shraddha. And for us aspiring practitioners, those who are trying to practice bhakti, this definition is very important. He says, he gives a very simple definition. He says, Sa Sharanapati Lakshana. This definition, because see, here, it's very difficult to define the condition of your heart. How do you define? He says it's a special condition of your heart, special state of your consciousness. So, but then he says how this internal state of your consciousness manifests externally. He says, Sa Sharanapati Lakshana, the external of faith by which you can judge whether you yourself or other people have faith, has this lakshana of Sharanapati or Sharanagati, which we know there are 6 limbs of Sharanagati. Anukulyasya sankalpah pratikulyasya varjanam rakshishya diti vishvaso goptritva varanam tatha atmanikshipa karpanye. The 6 limbs of Sharanagati, starting with accepting everything favorable and rejecting everything unfavorable, accepting the Lord as protector and as a nourisher, as someone who helps us to sustain our life, and the utter humility and the desire to dedicate your whole life and whole time and life energy to the service of the Lord. This is the external manifestation of of the faith. And that's exactly what is being depicted in this addendum to the story, where Ajamila goes to Haridwar, and he repents, and he's sitting in the temple of Vishnu in Haridwar. Actually, there is still Ghat in Haridwar, where Ajamil was performing his bhajan for the rest of the life. So again, why it is so important to very carefully study this this part of this Ajamila story. Usually we're very much inspired and concentrated on the first part of Ajamila story, because it's kind of free ticket to the spiritual world, kind of lucky lucky ticket. a lucky number. But actually for us, the second part of Ajamila story is more important. Because while studying it deeply, we can emulate the same sort of chitta vritti vishesha, the same sort of condition of our consciousness, which will help us to practice bhakti in a proper way. Otherwise, we always count, I chant holy name so many times, at least once I must have chanted nice, so everything is fine. But that's not the point of this, because again, the story is, yes, we can get little installment of Krishna's mercy by chanting the holy name, the dim reflection of the holy name Namabhas once. But the full installment of Krishna's mercy we can only get if we chant it with faith. What happened? Anyway, I have to finish it now. And there are so many things to be said more about this. But just one little thing, and I will finish the class. So Srila Prabhupada explains, while paraphrasing and shortening very elaborate purport, very mighty and powerful purport of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur to the verses 9 and 10 of this chapter, he's condensing this very much and giving the gist. So one very interesting point which is raised by Srila Prabhupada here in the purport: how is that possible that Ajamil chanted the holy name in a pure way and still continued with his sinful life? And what is the mechanism of this? And how does it go together? And we know Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that this is just, the analogy with the tree which doesn't bear the fruit immediately, and there is some, he was not really doing it in a sinful way. Srila Jiva Goswami explains it slightly differently, but in a very beautiful way. It's a very beautiful explanation. He says that, how does the two things, one is bhakti, which is completely spiritual, and another one is our material mind full of sinful tendencies. How do they combine together? And what is the mechanism of their combining together, and how ultimately the bhakti becomes victorious over the sinful tendencies in the mind. And that's very important for us, which can clearly see this phenomenon within our heart. We have some faith, we're practicing bhakti, at the same time sinful tendencies are still there in the mind. So Srila Jiva Goswami explains, answering the question, how do they mix the bhakti and the sinful tendencies? He says they don't mix. He says the bhakti exists in your consciousness, and the sinful tendencies also exist in your consciousness, simultaneously. But two things at the same time happen. First of all, the sinful tendencies which are still there in your mind, they lose the power to overpower you. They are not taking over your consciousness. And even though they're still there, they're like the example which Prabhupada gives about the poisonous fangs, which are removed from the serpent. They're still there, but they don't have the power to overpower your consciousness completely. And then he says, the next point, he says that and he gives the example of the process, which is the process, Ayurvedic process, which is called Kajalikaran, the process of turning the sulfur of mixing mercury with sulfur. If you just put mercury and sulfur together, they will not mix. Sulfur is separate and mercury is separate. But then what you should do, you should take your pestle, and you again and again and again and again and again and again and again. And after so much rubbing, all of a sudden the miracle happened. And it happens quite miraculously. There is no sulfur, there is no mercury, there is mercury sulfide. Employing my sinful propensity, a chemist. I will enlighten you in this regard. But the chemical reaction takes place, and Srila Jiva Goswami explains this is exactly what is happening within our mind. Initially, bhakti is separate and our senses are separate. And the sinful tendencies of our mind are still there. But if you continue rubbing it with the pestle of your chanting beads, and you're chanting again and again and again, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, while trying to concentrate your mind on the sound and on the Lord Himself, then at one point the mercury of the holy name combines together with the sulfur of your senses and mind, and completely spiritualize your senses and mind. And that moment in time, only the sinful tendencies will disappear completely. While before that, the sinful tendencies may be there, but they're not so dangerous. And that's the point of the story. And actually, this last verse, this is the very 1 minute, give me. The last verse of this story, which is supposed to be the, which is actually explaining what we should do, why this story is there. This story is not for us to chant the holy name consciously or practice Krishna consciousness, being totally unconscious of Krishna consciousness, and being even unconscious of the effect of Krishna consciousness, as Ajamila was. The story is there. It's very beautifully, in a roundabout way, in a poetical way, explained in this verse, in the last verse of this chapter. Mriyamana harer nama grinan putro pacharitan Ajamila api agat dhamma kimuta shradhaya grinan. It is said the very peculiar condition of Ajamila are explained in this verse. He was dying, and he chanted the holy name. He didn't mean Krishna, he meant his son, Grinan Putra Paricharitan, and he didn't have any face. And what else? There was something else. No, maybe it's enough. Maybe only 3, but I think it was 4 conditions. But anyway, but kimuta, this is kaimutya nyaya, what to speak of. This is the certain experience. So actually, the point of this story is that you're not dying, you're still alive. Please chant the holy name. Please don't chant the holy name by calling your son. Please chant the holy name by calling Shri Radha Giridhari. And please don't do it without face, as Ajamila, but please do it with face. So that's the point of this last verse and the whole story. Here is the facility, but what is the purport? We should practice this holy name, not counting that we will chant the holy name while we are dying. Please don't count on this. Please don't count that you unconsciously or by calling somebody else some some of your fellow brahmacharis, you chant his holy name at the moment of death and you will be free. Don't count on this. Please don't count on the chanting of holy name without Shraddha, Ajamila. That's not the purport. The purport is that please do it while you're still alive, with full consciousness of whom you're calling, with a very specific form of whom you're calling, and with complete Shraddha or faith in this process. That's the idea of this verse. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. So, sorry for being so late.
Hold on in the ether world. What to do? I mean, that was an excellent class. It generated so many questions. Now, I had the good fortune of meeting with you this afternoon, and I've noted a whole set of things I want to ask you. But well, it doesn't matter. But that doesn't give the facility for the devotees who may have questions. Vijay, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Continue.
But well, this time frame. I think we could take questions for maybe another 10 minutes.
That's
Do the devotees have questions? I've got a second chance. I mean, no pun intended. But anybody else who has to leave? Anybody else who has to
He
leave?
has a question.
Will we let others speak as well?
No, I know what I'm doing here. Do any of you who have to leave on Sankirtan have a question? All right then, if you have to leave on Sankirtan, you can go ahead and go, and then we'll take another 10, 15 minutes for questions. So who has a question who does not have to go? I got one. All right. You know, you mentioned that in the 6th canto there's 2 stories, and are manifestations of the nourishment of the Lord, how the amazing way the nourishment of the Lord sustains and delivers the living entity. And that Ajamila shows that nourishment comes via the holy name. The other was Vritasura. How does the nourishment come via Vritasura? Is that also via the holy name? Or it seemed to indicate that there was another form of nourishment manifest by the story of Vritasura.
The story of Vritasura very beautifully is that bhakti is not really dependent on the form of your body. It doesn't even depend on your previous karma or whatever. Bhakti is so powerful. That's another manifestation of the nourishment that no matter who you are, you may be the most horrible demon, you still be delivered by this process of bhakti. The bhakti can be practiced despite of any material conditions. That's the next point of this.
Quite moving, thank you. Who's next? Ready?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you for the wonderful class. I was meditating on this point that you said about external manifestation of internal faith is the 6 limbs of Sharanagati. As a neophyte, I can only judge someone's faith by looking at their externals, and so in my practice, I try to 6 limbs, even though I don't have faith. So is it that in the Vaidhi Sadhaka level, especially in the beginning, one practices externally those 6 limbs so that internal faith comes? Or how does that internal faith come?
See, you cannot practice it externally if you don't have any faith. You must have some faith. It's just Sharanagati is such a Sharanagati. It's a very deep thing. It's multidimensional. You can practice Sharanagati having little faith, and while having this huge faith, like gopis have totally, completely unbelievable faith. They also practice Sharanagati. So, but your practice of Sharanagati and their practice of Sharanagati will be slightly different, right? But still it's Sharanagati. According to the level of your faith, you will practice Sharanagati. If your faith is very deep, you will practice it in a very deep level, by perfecting all the limbs of Sharanagati to complete, excellence. But, in the initial stages, we also practice Sharanagati. Yes, I don't drink tea, that's Sharanagati. That's a great sacrifice, what to speak about vodka, so that's that's already Sharanagati. Gopis, they don't have this problem. For somebody, that's a great sacrifice.
We practice Rakshisa, so that means faith. It's the definition of faith. That's what, convinced that Krishna will protect.
Yeah.
You have
Yeah.
that faith. That's faith.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I was wondering, you're talking about the two tendencies existing independently within the mind, mercury and sulfur.
Mhm.
And
Simultaneously, not exactly independently, but not
Simultaneously is a
not
better word.
touching.
And the indication was that by chanting the holy name, that's an example of, grinding in the pestle, and eventually there'll be a point that one over, supersedes, consumes, overpowers the other, and one's no longer
Yeah.
affected by that
Yeah.
sinful tendencies or inclinations or recollections.
Yeah.
But does it work the other way also? If one, while chanting, contemplates material, can it work the other way? The old example of the angel and the devil on two shoulders. So now we're giving the example of the holy name winning over in due course of time. Does it work the other way? If one contemplates sinful desires, can it also consume what,
It can, what happens, as I said, when the bhakti is present in the mind, then we really can't control our sinful tendency. We are not being overpowered by them. But despite this ability not being overpowered by them, if we surrender to them just for not necessarily curiosity's sake, but because of the lack of faith, we still hope that by performing sinful activities we become happy. If this sort of idea comes to our mind and we start practicing sinful life, even though we are not really pushed, we are not really forced to do it. The difference is that, the normal quote-unquote people, they're forced to do it. They have no chance. They have no choice, they have to do it. Devotee has the choice, and if he chooses to practice sinful life, again, without really being pushed in a very strong way, and gradually gives up this bhakti processes. Yes, it happens, but that's exactly the point which I made. That only happens if you don't have shraddha. If the shraddha is very strong, then you know that I will not be happy by exercising my sinful nature. The happiness is a completely different ball game. It's a completely different stuff.
so it's having the faith, because I'm thinking about what's the difference between an accidental fall down and like a willful fall down. So just let me say it, because I want you to correct me. So it's, if the shraddha, one of the aspects of shraddha is thinking know, you may have the inclination or the remembrance, but you know that there's really no taste there, there's nothing happening there. But if one doesn't have that shraddha or faith conviction, and thinks, well, you know, maybe I left something behind there, or maybe there's something in there, then that is a willful intention that can generate that cycle of
exactly.
spiral down.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly. It's this. He wants-
Do we have someone on manifest?
Yeah.
Hare Krishna. This is from the internet. My name is Maitreya Das. Hare Krishna.
Oh, Maitreya,
Actually, my basis is thank you. In speaking of Shraddha, in English we just have this one word faith, and it can represent the faith by which one takes to the path, enough faith to at least begin practicing. And then when one begins to practice with that faith, then the faith can deepen, it can be nourished, and one can develop a taste for the holy name, and that reciprocation can further and further deepen one's faith. And then there's the verse in the Gita where Krishna cautions Arjuna, if you act through false ego, not hearing me, you will be lost. So in this example we're giving, if someone is still a little bit enticed by the sinful desires, and he thinks, well, let me just examine a little bit, like Bhattacharya Maharaj just mentioned it, let me just experiment and just make sure that there really is no happiness there. And that could be enough to derail us for some time, as we saw in the case of Ajamila, have very unpleasant experiences. The one question I have is there appears to be this one word faith, but there's various levels, and it can have different connotations. The impetus to take up the process, and then the deepening and further deepening of faith. Where can we study more about this phenomenon of deepening faith and how that happens?
Again, in Bhakti Sandarbha, Srila Jiva Goswami explains what is the specific meaning of the word faith in this particular case or in this regard. He says that faith here, it's not exactly the same concept or understanding which is there in Western culture or in English word faith or in Russian word vera. The meaning of Shraddha is respect. Respect towards the spiritual practice, towards the process of bhakti, towards those people who are practicing bhakti. So the deepening of faith in this particular case or in this framework, conceptual framework, means the deepening our respect and understanding of what bhakti in the ultimate sense can bring us. So that's the thing, If this respect is there, like Prabhupada, he also explained this. He says, you come to devotees for the first time, and you kind of like these people. They are innocent people. You like their faces, bright faces. You like prasadam. He says that's when Shraddha comes to your heart, because you feel the respect towards these people. You're respectful to them. And the opposite of faith in this understanding, in this framework, is the offense, because offense is the opposite of respect. If you respect somebody, then you don't offend. So, and the offense is something which destroys your faith or makes it less and less profound, more and more shallow. In our relationship, if we develop some relationship, but then we start offending this person, then the relationship becomes distant. So in the same way, we develop some relationship with bhakti through the chanting of the holy name, but if we willfully commit offenses towards bhakti or towards those who are carrying bhakti within their mind and spreading bhakti and preaching bhakti, then the faith will dwindle in this regard. But Bhakti Sandarbha is definitely a very interesting description of this phenomenon.
Thank you so much.
I think we should wrap up there, Marsh, because of the.
It's fine. It's fine. He was just from the very beginning. He
ask
was.
We have one more question.
I can
Can
ask
you
you
ask
when we
later,
leave.
One
I'll
more,
go for
just
two
one more.
quick questions and then you can decide whether we have time. But
or just ask one question?
all right. Well, I really like the spiritual ticket analogy that you used, and so we know that there are various levels at which we can practice Krishna consciousness. The two big distinctions that you gave is unconsciously and consciously, right? One will not necessarily give you love of God, the other will give you love of God. And then you also make the point that if it doesn't take the intellect or the consciousness by which we are acting for the dharma or the shakti of that
Vastu Shakti.
aspect to act upon us. So in this regard, if we want to really convince someone that the spiritual ticket will really take us somewhere, what are the different levels of this practice of Krishna consciousness that will take us to the different levels of the spiritual world? Can we really describe that to someone who
Sure.
is interested in
Sure.
knowing if I practice this form, I will go to this destination. If I practice that form, I will go to that
Yeah.
destination. So it's just a motivation for the person to. Because if you're taking a flight, I think it's. Sort of
Yeah, so yes, this, as I said, Vastu Shakti, nahi buddhir apekshate, the intelligence is not involved in the process of interacting with Vastu Shakti of Vastu, but also there is something which is called Vyavadhan, which is blocking Vastu Shakti. You know, there is certain things which can block Vastu Shakti from affecting you or from acting upon you. Like, definitely the fire has the power to burn, but if the wood is very wet, then this wetness is the blocking Vastu Shakti of the fire. The Vastu Shakti is still there, but it cannot really act upon you because of this blocking power which is there. So the blocking power of Vastu Shakti is offense, and the grace which is there is the face which is respect. So these two opposites are there. You know, if you try to deepen your faith and meaning deepen your respect towards the process of bhakti, towards Srimad Bhagavatam scriptures, towards the people who are practicing bhakti, then your practice of bhakti will become more and more effective and will become more and more powerful. And then, of course, there is different, you know, and faith means Shastriya Shraddha, and you may have different levels of faith, and you may have different understanding or different levels of Shastra which you have faith in. You know, there are very profound Shastras which preach the love of God, and if you develop faith in them, then your practice of bhakti will bring much more impressive result than as if you develop the faith in something which is which kind of is trying to stimulate your somewhat conditional propensities, you know. Try to say, you know, you practice this and you will become very rich, and you know, and then ultimately you will go to, you know, to, but it's very important to, so it's also Shraddha, it's also, there are some Shastras which try to stimulate in you this. But Dharma Project Kaitavotra Paramonir Matsaranam Satam, there is Srimad Bhagavatam where the Dharma Project Kaitava. If you develop faith in Srimad Bhagavatam, in the message of Srimad Bhagavatam, and deepen your faith in the message of Srimad Bhagavatam, then your practice of bhakti will give the most impressive results. Okay, thank you. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.